I remember the exact moment my world changed. My father's voice was cold as ice, cutting through the kitchen like a knife. "Why would you marry a construction worker? Do you know what you've done?" My mother didn't even look at me. She was already shaking her head, disappointed, disgusted. And I realized in that instant, I wasn't just fighting for love, I was fighting for survival. My name is Clara. I was 28 when I met Jake, a man who smelled like sawdust and diesel fuel, whose hands were calloused from labor, and whose smile was honest, unpolished, and infuriatingly magnetic. I grew up in an upper-middle-class suburb in New Jersey, a town where appearances mattered more than reality. My parents, Ellen and Richard, built their lives on status and respectability. I was the golden child, the one who got straight A's, went to Princeton, and earned a high-paying corporate job straight out of college. I was supposed to marry someone appropriate, someone with the last name that carried weight in country clubs and boardrooms. Jake had none of that. He had a pickup truck, a trailer of tools, and a dream that didn't include wearing a suit or attending cocktail parties. But the first time he smiled at me across a pile of lumber, explaining how he wanted to build homes that felt like real homes, not just boxes on a street, I knew. I knew he was different, and I didn't care what anyone thought. Bringing him home was a disaster. The first time he shook my father's hand, Richard barely looked up from his phone. "Nice to meet you, Jake," he said flatly. "So what exactly do you do?" Jake's smile didn't falter. "I build homes, sir. I make sure families have a place to belong." My mother's eyes narrowed. "But that's menial work. Don't you have bigger ambitions?" I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because Jake, he just nodded politely, never defensive, never apologetic. Family dinners became a minefield. My mother made subtle comments about how I could do better, and my father compared him silently to the men who worked for him, men who had suits, jobs, and bank accounts. My younger brother sneered openly, calling him a dirt-dragging idiot. And yet, every evening, I went home to Jake and felt more alive than I ever had in any corporate boardroom. Years passed. Jake poured his soul into his work. He started with small projects, fixing old homes, helping neighbors rebuild after storms, but gradually his reputation grew. Yet, to my family, he was still the same man in muddy boots who didn't belong at their table. I remember the engagement party. My parents insisted on hosting it at their mansion. Their friends whispered behind champagne glasses, laughing at Jake's simple attire, the dirt under his nails, his truck parked conspicuously outside. "You could do so much better, Clara," my mother whispered as she adjusted her diamond bracelet. "You already have," Jake replied quietly, and I almost fell in love with him all over again. Then came the first major blow. My father's business partner made a bad investment. My parents called me, not for advice, not to share concern, but with a thinly veiled plea. "Clara, maybe Jake could, help with some construction projects?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to help, but because I knew exactly what they meant. They wanted to exploit his skills while still looking down on him. And I refused. But they didn't stop there. Invitations disappeared. Holidays became minefields. Family events turned into lectures about how I married beneath myself. My heart ached, but my pride was fiercer. 10 years later, everything changed. It started with a call from my father. His voice was tight, panicked. "Clara, you need to come. It's urgent." I could hear the fear behind the polished tone he always wore. He didn't even ask how Jake or I were doing. He needed something from us. When we arrived, the truth hit me like a sledgehammer. My parents' mansion, their beloved properties, the fancy offices, they were crumbling under debt. Every investment they had made had failed, and their creditors were knocking. They needed Jake. Jake, who had quietly built a small construction company in the past decade, had expanded beyond my wildest dreams. He owned warehouses, acquired land, and had contracts with developers in 3 states. He wasn't just a construction worker anymore. He was a business empire, quietly growing while my parents were blind with arrogance, and I had the pleasure of watching their faces when we walked in. The dinner table was set for a polite conversation, but I knew it would be anything but. My father's eyes flicked nervously to Jake, my mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her pearls clinking as she gestured for us to sit. "Clara, we we need your help," my mother said, her voice small, almost unrecognizable. I smiled, calm, measured. "You mean Jake's help?" "Yes," she whispered. "Please, we don't know where else to turn." Jake leaned back, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "I'll help, but on my terms." Their eyes widened. The arrogance, the superiority, it had dissolved into fear. Jake outlined the conditions. All debts repaid in full by my parents within 5 years with interest, complete transparency on all future investments, no more undermining, mocking, or controlling me or my family. My parents didn't speak. The room was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin crawl. "Do we have a deal?" Jake asked calmly. Silence. Then my father swallowed hard. "Yes, we agree." I could see it in my mother's eyes, the realization that the dirt-dragging idiot she mocked was now the man holding her world together. And in that moment, I felt a rush of satisfaction, not just for the victory, but for the justice of it. Years of humiliation, dismissal, and betrayal had finally met consequences. Weeks later, our life settled back into its quiet rhythm. Jake continued building, expanding, thriving, not for revenge, but because he had always deserved it. My parents, humbled, kept their distance, offering small gestures of reconciliation, nothing forced, nothing dramatic. One afternoon, I watched Jake teaching our children how to measure timber correctly, their laughter echoing across the property. I realized that for 10 years, I had waited for approval, for recognition, for my family to see my choice as valid. But I didn't need it anymore. The people who mattered, the ones who loved, supported, and respected me, were right here. Jake, our children, and the life we built together. I finally understood the truth. You don't need everyone to respect your choices. You only need the ones who matter to see your heart. And as I looked out over the city Jake had quietly built from the ground up, roads, homes, bridges, neighborhoods, I smiled. 10 years ago, they laughed at him. 10 years later, he had built the city they live in, and I had the privilege of standing by his side. They wanted to control our lives, to mock our choices. But in the end, it was the construction worker they underestimated who built everything, and I got to watch them realize it too late.